I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello horror hounds, welcome to my horror house. A little bit of red wine for this review because I think I'm going to need it. I'm partial to a drop of Malbec if anyone wants to get me anything for Halloween or Christmas. Cheers! You are looking at the face of a man who has now watched Deep Blue Sea to Deep 2C. And my advice to you, ladies and gentlemen, is do not stare long into the abyss, for sometimes the abyss will stare back at you. I came to Deep 2C, like a lot of people I think, because of the trailer for Deep Blue Sea 3, Deep Blue 3. And the sudden realisation, hang on, there's a sequel to Deep Blue Sea and now there's a third movie? I should check these out, I like shark movies. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to talk a little bit about the opening of the film, then I'm going to give you the broad overview, what you really essentially need to take away. Then I'm going to talk about all the insane things that happen in Deep 2C, by which time you're going to be saying to yourself, this movie sounds nuts, I've got to check it out. And then I'm going to remind you again of the overview to just ground you and say no. We start out on the ocean and a small fishing vessel with two fishermen there, illegally finning sharks, catching sharks, removing their fins for fin soup, and then letting the sharks die, slowly suffocate because they can't swim anymore. A reprehensible real life practice that's absolutely repugnant and disgusting and instantly makes you want to see these two eaten by sharks. Interesting approach. Interesting ecological real world way into this story, and a nice way to get you on board a shark fest where you will be cheering on the sharks. Yes, it's a shark attack out in open waters, exactly like the prologue at the start of the original movie. It's exactly the same with a twist, because when our Thomas Jane character, this time a guy called Trent Slater, an ex-Navy SEAL, comes, A, he doesn't save the people, and B, you find out that this now pack of 5 sharks obey his commands. He's got them under his control. Surely we're in for some strange, new and exciting way to explore the world of genetically enhanced killer sharks. Nah. After an opening credit sequence, which I will come back to, we are introduced to our heroine, Dr. Misty Calhoun, giving a lecture on sharks and shark conservation and telling us that they're much maligned creatures and their reputation is not earned and is the fault of exploitative Hollywood movies. Now let's get on with our exploitative Hollywood movie, everyone. By the way, Misty Calhoun just sounds to me like the kind of character who should be saying things like, I'm Misty Calhoun and no one works on my ranch unless I say so. Her lecture ends and she's approached by a lawyer who presents her with a business deal. Here's a check for $50,000. You can take that regardless, as long as you come along to meet my billionaire boss who wants to give you a paying gig as a consultant. And if you agree to the consultancy position, I'll fund your research for the next 5 years. Does that smell an awful lot like the opening gambit of Jurassic Park? And remember I said earlier on that Trent Slater had trained those sharks. He's got a little dib-dab around his neck. And if you've seen Jurassic World, yeah, it's Chris Pratt's trained velociraptor little dog training clicker. Deep 2C shamelessly rips off little elements from the Jurassic Park movies, but oh, so boldly, much more boldly than that. It shamelessly rips off elements from its parent movie. Deep 2Sea is essentially a remake of the first movie on a smaller budget with slightly different characters. If I were being charitable, I would call it an sort of Elseworlds retelling of the original movie. My question to you really is, given a fairly decent sized budgeted 90s action movie version of the story starring Samuel L. Jackson, LL Cool J, Thomas Jane, Saffron Burrows, and 17 years later the 2 or 3 location, really small budget, couple of steps above sci-fi movie quality remake of that, then when are you ever going to watch the cheap and nasty remake? The answer is not, as the director said in one of the little featurettes on the DVD. He said 95% of the sharks in this movie are now computer generated because CG animation now is so much better than it was when the original movie was made. Now, mate, yeah, if you're ILM and you're Weta Workshop and people are willing to pay for that quality of computer generated imagery, then yes, CG is undoubtedly much better than it was in 1999 when Deep Blue Sea was made. What you mean is that for this production, CG is much, much cheaper. So you can get away with a lot more that still looks about as crappy as it did in the original movie. To answer the question, why would you watch the cheaper remake? The answer is because of all the craziness therein. After we've had our initial kill sequence, we go into an opening credit, underwater diving, theme tune song playing sequence that is the Deep Blue Sea version, very consciously, of a James Bond movie opening credit sequence. Misty Calhoun diving with the creatures of the deep while the Deep Blue Sea theme tune is sung over the top of it. You now have Carl Durant, the billionaire, this movie's version of the Samuel L. Jackson character, only Carl Durant is also the baddie. You have a scene where he is explaining to Trent that as soon as he's done with the sharks, no matter how dangerous they are, and he's got what he wants from them, he'll kill them all. And floating outside his underwater compound window, eavesdropping on that conversation, is one of the sharks. Durant is also harvesting antibodies from enlarged shark brains, not to try and find a cure for Alzheimer's, as was with the first movie, but to discover and patent smart drugs that can help boost human intelligence in quantum leaps and bounds. Why? Because he is convinced that in very short order, AI will become unmanageable and quantum computers will lead to the rise of the machines, and he is certain that machines are going to rise up and destroy humans, and the only way to prevent this is to create a drug that will make humans smarter than the machines. It is a drug that he himself is taking, so I don't know why he has to test it on the sharks. It's a drug that when he takes it, this happens. And for someone who is constantly dosing up on smart drugs, he's a really dumb character. He doesn't display any sort of limitless abilities at all. He just turns into an asshole. Even the people who have been working with him for a prolonged period, at least 2 characters say he used to be alright, but since he started taking this smart drug, he's turned into a real asshole. If it's not making him smarter and just making him more of an asshole, it begs the question, why doesn't he just stick with cocaine like everyone else? Misty seemingly can't find a wetsuit roomy enough to allow her to do her zip all the way up. It does make me wonder who had the conversation with that poor actress. Just so we're clear, tits and teeth. Just don't do the zip all the way up. Yeah, this is what you went to acting school for. The crazy addition to the smart evolved shark mythology here is baby sharks. Bella, one of the bull sharks that's been genetically altered, is pregnant, and during the course of the film she gives birth to her babies. So it's a neat little idea. Inside the facility, a swarm of little piranha-sized second generation smart hungry bull sharks that make a screeching noise. This sounds crazy and nuts, right? Yes, and yet it's still fairly plodding. It's still fairly boring. I've said time and time again on previous videos, for smaller budget movies, if you don't have the budget or the capability of doing the big things that much bigger budget movies can, just lean into the crazy. Deep 2C dips its foot into the crazy when it needed to go absolutely all out. Because instead of Aquatica, you have Achelios, a base which above water, well, this is what Aquatica looked like in the original movie. This is what Achelios looks like. A couple of shacks, some gangplanks and some barrels. Below water as well, even though we're shown in one shot the complex looks like this, we basically spend our time on one set, the wet lab, which means that the entire cast is essentially in one room for a lot of the movie, shouting at one another. There's an awful lot of shouting acting. When the water gets in and the baby sharks get in, the same stretch of corridor is made to look like different areas of the base by just being lit blue, then green, then red. You will see a lot of scenes from the first movie reimagined as something a lot cheaper. And you know the sad thing about it, there's a couple of featurettes on the DVD, 5 minutes each. There's a gag reel and behind the scenes stuff, and it looked like the actors were really up for it and keeping their spirits up and having a good time and a laugh. And after watching that, I just felt a little bit sorry for them. It's kind of not their fault that they're in this crappy movie. It is their fault that they spend an awful lot of time shouting at one another rather than acting with one another. The baby shark idea is good, but they don't really have enough money for that. While you get crazy, funny, I laugh my ass off at stuff like this, most of the time the baby sharks are represented by the screeching noise and bubbles in the water, and generally when they attack, you see them all swarming around, and then someone goes underwater and then the water turns red. That's not what I want from a shark attack movie. There are a few moments of gore in it. Computer generated gore, but gore nonetheless. Really needed to lean into that. The baby sharks are used far too much while we're inside that one corridor, standing in for 6 corridors. It's kind of a relief when everyone gets back up to the surface and we can bring the full-size grown-up sharks into play. A movie that should have found a 4th and a 5th gear. It could have leaned into that craziness. It's got a Bond theme opening credits. It's got a swarm of piranha baby sharks. It's got an insane billionaire who's convinced that machines are going to take over the world, ingesting his own smart drug, whilst his eavesdropping sharks decide to fuck with his plans. This should have been an absolutely off-the-wall gonzo movie. We would have loved it. As it is, it tries too much to be the first movie. Why are you doing that? Why are you replicating scene after scene after scene from the first movie poorly? If it were a short film, if it were half the length and served up as an homage to Deep Blue Sea 17 years later and released on the internet, people would love it because it wouldn't have stopped. It would have been like Kung Fury. As it is, it's it just sags in far too many places and reminds you far too often of the fairly decent film that spawned this.